Okay, welcome everybody. Great to have you joining us for what is actually the second Learning and Skills Group webinar today. This follows this morning's webinar and, of course, the Learning and Technologies Awards last night, which may explain the slight roughness of my voice. Good to have you with us. We've got David James with us. I'll be introducing him in about a minute's time, and then we'll be kicking off with the webinar at about 12 o'clock. I'm going to ask the question. We've got 20 people in the room. We're expecting quite a few this morning. So I'm just going to ask the question, which I always ask very quickly, looking out the window. If you're lucky enough to be near a window, what's the weather like where you are? And where are you in the world? I'm in London, and unlike this morning, the sun has come out. So it remains cold, but with a bit of sun. Where are you in the world? What's the weather like where you are? David, I see, is one of many people typing into the chat as we do our meteorological tour of the world. Gray in Germany says, Helen. Sunny and a little overcast in West Sussex, says David. Madeline is rainy in the Yorkshire Dales, but even in the rain, Yorkshire's beautiful. Mary is making us all feel a bit jealous. There are clear blue skies in Paris. Samantha's in Corby, where it's miserable. Only the weather, I hope, Samantha. Sun in South Africa. Ronelle, we are delighted for you. Also a little bit jealous. Carol's grey in Lincoln. Yeah, Lincoln's a bit unforgiving, isn't it, Carol? It's so flat, and when it's grey, it's really grey, and when it's cold, it's really cold. Medea is in Budapest, where it is foggy. Sakata is in Milton Keynes in the UK, where it is cold. Yes, I'm sorry about that. James, it's finally stopped raining in North Kent, but it's sunny, even if it's still cold. Yeah, same as me in West London. Carol, what time did I party until? I have to confess, I did a bit of an early quitting, Carol. I was out before you. We left at 1:30 when it was still raining. In London office now, it is dry. Good for you. Lee's in Cardiff in Wales is not reporting on the weather. Stephanie's in Zurich where it's cloudy. Ellen says it's still still wet and miserable in North Yorkshire as it was in the morning's webinar. Cold in Gloucestershire, reports Georgia, but the sun's coming through. Angeline was with us in Ohio this morning at 10 o'clock our time, 5 o'clock her time. No, actually possibly even earlier than that. And she reported snow. There is still snow in Ohio. We welcome you to the warmth of the Convivial Learning and Skills Group community, Angeline, and we do hope that the snow doesn't cause you any problems. Norca, great to have you back in Manchester, back to normal in Manchester with added strong winds. Right, let's crack on. Second webinar of the day. We have 5 key challenges that learning and development faces and how to overcome them with David James. I'm going to run through the housekeeping, then I'll hand you over to David very shortly. Firstly, we're always asked, will the event be recorded? Yes, the event will be recorded, and you can download it from Monday at this URL here. Plus, you'll get a link in the mail tomorrow with a link to the recording. That's a natural part of what we do. The sound, I'm speaking at the moment, so if you can't hear me, please have a look at the bottom and play with your speakers. Oh, sorry, play with your speakers or your microphone or your headset. Typically, audio is working pretty well. We use chat a lot, not just for talking about the weather. We use it to share ideas, resources. I always say that no one person in the room, however smart they are, is smarter than all of us together, provided we work and support each other in a collegiate way, which is the Learning and Skills Group way. I'm looking forward to getting your comments, thoughts, resources thrown into the chat. We have an area under the slides currently taken up with a logo, but that's where you'll be putting your questions to David. And also we have general chat. Sometimes we have questions and polls, and in those cases, it'll be quite clear on the screen where you can chat. All right, that's probably enough for me. I just want to say, if you have great ideas, screenshots, thoughts to share from it, please do so on Twitter using hashtag LSGWebinar. That's probably enough from me. Time to hand us over now to our speaker for today, David James. David, am I correct in saying that you are the founder at 360 Learning?
Not this time. No, I was the founder of Loop, and we were acquired by 360 Learning at the end of last year.
Fair enough. Suddenly your sound is quite crackly. I don't know what happened, David.
Oh, is it? All right. Okay. Is that any better or no?
No, it's actually still quite crackly.
Right. Okay. Then hold on one moment. Let me see if I can do anything here.
By the way, we always get online well in advance, and we do a sound check. David was absolutely fine, and now he's got an issue with his sound. The only thing I'd say, David, is if it's possible to come in through the application again, then that would be great. Let's try it again. Okay, you're trying a different. Go on.
How's that, Don? Is that any better?
Keep speaking.
Okay, so as I was mentioning before,
no, we've still got quite a lot of crackle on there. Okay.
Right.
James is just typing something in the chat. James is our Adobe expert,
and
I'm just going to see what James has to say. He's always my go-to for advice on these matters. It may be, if you haven't come in through the application, that we should try doing that. Okay, I'm going to. Is it possible, James, you could go back and come back in through the application? Are you on a Mac or a PC?
I'm on a Mac. It wasn't redirecting me to the application, but let me try.
Let me just drop the. This may take a moment. Here's the application here. Just I'll put that in the presenter chat. If you want to go there and download, have a go with that. And okay, so people, we may be. Meanwhile, David, I'm going to ask people a question. All right, sure. And see if we can get this sorted out. And I'm going to ask them an open question, and I'd love you just to put your answer to this question in the general chat and observation. So my question to you is, given that we're talking here about about the 5 key challenges that learning and development faces, you know what my question is going to be, and it's a poll question that David's going to ask, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What's your key challenge? Just choose one. What's your key challenge? And Carol's straight off the blocks that you're facing in learning and development. Okay, love the answers coming through. And please put the answers, if you can, in that central box, the general chat and observations. A really wide range of answers coming through. When David comes back online, I'll present him with these answers. Interestingly, they totally match, and please keep them coming. They totally match some of the answers that I got in my global sentiment survey, which I ran last year, and I run every year. And I asked people, what are your key challenges? And they're falling into some buckets which I think will be recognizable to people. Money and budgets. That's Carol. Stakeholder buy-in, says Angeline. Engagement, Sak Qatar says, and other people do as well. Carol says, no money and no staff to create our own materials. Time is always an issue as well. Engagement from staff on something totally opposite to their day-to-day role, says Katie. And I think that sort of exemplifies the issue here, which is that people find it difficult to justify to themselves, and their managers find it difficult to justify time spent doing anything other than meeting short-term targets. Buy-in from stakeholders, says Linda. Time, learning culture and compliance in modular learning journeys. Jana, that's quite interesting and quite complex. Just going to David's back. I'm just going to change him into a presenter. No, I've changed Carol into a presenter. That's interesting. Sorry, Carol, I'll make you a participant. Let me take David and make him into a presenter. Okay, David should be back with us as a presenter. Let's see how that's turning out. And hopefully the sound issues will be gone now. I'd say that there are several categories here. One is people's motivation. One is technical side of things. David, while you were gone, I sort of stole your first poll question. I asked people what the challenges they're facing. Can you do us a quick sound check? Say hello.
Yeah, sure. Is that any better, Don?
100% better. Should have done that at 1:45, but I was quite impressed with the way you were sounding. It sounded all right.
Yeah, it did sound great, didn't it?
But you sound great now. Okay, listen, I'm going to quickly sum up for you what we've got in chat. Really, really interesting. People's challenges. Time is one. Budgets are another. People's engagement, if I can wrap that up. So Trevor sums up here, learners having time to consume content outside working hours. And there are lots of different ways of looking at that. But Katie says the same thing, people finding time and it being okay to learn. Finding a secure LMS, says Norca, and there are other technical issues as well, like integration with providers and government regulated systems. So stakeholder buy-in, time, budget, technical issues are some of the key challenges that we're facing. And I have to say, this is something which is a constant theme, especially at the moment. You've got 1 hour. Well, actually, you've got 50 minutes now, David. You're going to give us the answer to all these questions, yeah?
Yeah, I'll do my best, Don.
Fantastic.
Thank you
Over to
very
you.
much. Thanks for keeping the seat warm. And thank you everybody for getting involved so early there. The good news is that we're going to be covering the vast majority of the of what you've stated on there. But first of all, I'll give a bit of an introduction. I am the Chief Learning Officer at 360 Learning, which isn't the interesting bit. I'm also the host of the Learning and Development podcast, in which I get the opportunity to speak with learning and development leaders across the world, and have done for 3.5 years. And I suppose even more interestingly, I was Director of Learning, Talent and Organizational Development for Disney, for Europe, Middle East and Africa, looking after all the different lines of business situated across the region. And when it comes to the key challenges facing learning and development, I face them myself. I didn't just run the European part of Disney. I spent a period of time running the UK Learning and Development Department, and also a small part of the NatWest Bank when I'm working in check clearing many years ago. So I know what it's like to face these key challenges, and I think that it seems that 2023 is going to continue to be a very challenging time for us, which we're going to be expected to deliver perhaps more with less, and demonstrate our impact even more greatly. Because I remember somebody saying to me in 2008, and I remember I was at Disney, and somebody from the marketing department says, "Hey, when things get tough, it's always the learning and development and marketing departments that are cut." And I got incredibly paranoid at the time, and then began to make what we did a hell of a lot more visible as well as impactful, and I might be able to share some of that as we go as well. And so as Don was doing when he was keeping the seat warm for me, he asked you that question, and so we'll head into that first one about resources. Now I've got a contentious point as well. I'm going to sound like a little bit like the government and say that hey, we can continue to do lots of stuff regardless of whether there's money in the public coffers or not. But what I will say throughout all of this is, by all means, please challenge me. Let's by all means, let's keep the conversation going. I'm not afraid of getting your questions, because it's from you telling me that you don't agree or it doesn't work in your context that I get to understand more about your context. But in my experience, when there's an abundance of money, it seems that there seems to be a limitation on analysis. All these big behemoth systems plied full of generic content thrown out into the world, and those will transform our organizations, especially when there's no restrictions on budget. And when it comes down to when we don't have so much abundance, we take a look at what we spent and we wonder how we prove that it is actually valuable. So I don't think that it's necessarily a terrible thing to look at ourselves and start equating our spend to the actual value. And it's sometimes during these tougher times in learning and development that we hold ourselves a little bit more accountable to that. But that said, and I'm going to be referring to a report that we recently published in 360 Learning quite a bit on here, because it does reveal a lot of not just learner preferences here, but what I say is building on that, what employees tell us is actually effective in what we actually deliver, and perhaps what is even effective despite learning and development. So I think that these are absolutely crucial on here. It was a pretty large sample size as well. We interviewed, and we've got responses back of 3,000 people from around the world. 2,000 of those are employees themselves. And but as I said, we focused our questions around effective, not preference. I always get frustrated with reports that tell us that of all the ways in which we deliver content, people said they preferred face-to-face, because I heard another statistic on Michelle Ocker's fantastic Learning Uncut podcast that asking people what they prefer in terms of their learning, they would tend to state that they prefer more passive learning experiences. Of course they do. You don't have to do so much work, and you've always got that get out to say, rather than applying what you learned, that the training didn't work. So we veered away from asking what you prefer, and we kept it onto what was most effective. And it being about learning in the flow of work, we also learned that half of respondents said they had limited resources and budget to address this issue, which was signpost to us that regardless of how effective something is, that time and budgets were always going to be a limitation to do something beyond the norm. We know that our curriculum and our content suites are our bread and butter, but sometimes, quite often, they are notorious for not being able to show us any return on investment. So some common mistakes with regard to spending this budget and using our resources. Number one is buying a lot of generic content because it plugs a gap in our curricula or our content. And of course, this is because people do ask us, do we have anything on this? Do we have anything on that? And almost like flip-flopping, if we don't have it, then we see it as a problem that needs to be filled. But of course, it is costly. And I can't tell you how much time I had to spend at Disney. And I'm not absolving myself of all responsibility for what I had to do and what I wasn't able to achieve there. But the learning technology was certainly one, because it was a global decision, the LMS that was built. And of course, then it was filled with exhaustive amount of content. And because, and you've already stated this on here, there was a reluctance to engage in it. A large part of my job was trying to drive traffic towards this platform that people were voting with their attention, or voted against with their attention. And I had to try to drive engagement to try to justify the investment in it. So I'm sure it was bought as a way to transform learning and development, and therefore the organization. But the only thing it really transformed was the budget, because there was a lot less in it once we'd spent the money. But that's because we didn't focus on real problems. We tried to focus on plugging content gaps or gaps in our curricula. But by not addressing problems, of course, we're just hoping then that we're going to find an opportunity to help people. And of course, the big opportunity that we have is to help people when they need help. And the biggest opportunities that we have, and the ones that we miss often, are when people are transitioning into and through our organization, and during periods of enforced adaptation. They're crying out for our help, and we've got to ask ourselves the question, where are we? Where are we when they need our help, not when we need them to engage? So some things that we could do instead. Number one is focus on distinct learner cohorts. I had this really interesting conversation once with somebody who contacted me on LinkedIn and said, "Oh, I like the idea of learning the flow of work, but I wonder whether we could do it top down." And I said, "Well, you can't really, because you need to understand the problems that you're addressing." He said, "Yeah, but the thing is that we have hundreds of thousands of users, so it's impossible to do it bottom up." So the next question I asked was the killer. I said, "Well, how many people are engaging now?" And he said, "Well, next to no one." So I said, "Imagine solving the problems of 1,000 people in your organization. That's 1,000 more users than you've got now." For which he'd stated, "Good point." Now, this is the thing. Engagement doesn't come from doing the same thing over and over and over. And there's a phrase that in learning and development as well called rip and replace, when you pull out one behemoth system filled full of content and plug in another behemoth system filled full of content, thinking it was the way it looked that was the problem. But it never was. It was because it didn't actually solve the problems of the people that were expected to use it. So another thing that it lacks that we can add as well is context. That we are the learning experts in our organizations, but we hand over sometimes the hardest part of any learning experience, which is adding the context and then applying it to our own situations. By involving subject matter experts in helping to address clearly defined problems, we can help to do that. And one of the skill sets that seems to be emerging in learning and development to help us bring this all together is product management. And this isn't just managing products as far as an LMS or an LXP is concerned. This is a distinct difference between implementation, but this is an end-to-end adding value to a defined user group. And what I mean here is doing the analysis, understanding the experience of the people that we're seeking to influence, working with them to make a demonstrable difference, and then scaling what actually works using technology. It's a fundamental difference between an implementation of what looks like a comprehensive solution to actually addressing the needs of the cohorts themselves. But a big step towards this is in understanding our learners. And I forgot to mention before that I will look to get you involved, and as well as leaving it open for you to comment and heckle as you may wish. I'm going to ask you some more questions during this section here, because understanding the people that we are expected to guide and support is a huge part of this. And within the survey and the report that we shared the link to a moment ago, first of all, when we did our run through the other day, Don said, "Surely this the stat here should be inverted," and I completely agreed. Because it looks like only good news, and it is. It says on here only 16% of UK respondents have a limited understanding of their learners' preferences. That's right, and Don pointed out, but 84% don't. And that was the point that we were trying to make here. 84% of respondents said that they have an understanding of learners' preferences and performance challenges, which is really good news. But then when you take a look at the rest of the data, you see that some of the responses are contrary to this. Take a look at this, for example. 29% of the respondents, and again, it was a huge sample size from largely across the UK, the US, Germany, and France. So that's 500 respondents of each. Said online training, only 29% said that online training that they'd experienced was effective. Again, I'm not going down to preference, because when you ask the preference, people prefer to be in a room. This is just about effectiveness, despite this being the main type of training they received. And what we were really clear about what that actually meant. That was e-learning, virtual training, and MOOCs. So the big ticket items that we'd be spending our money on, which leaves us then with 71% of respondents who said that it wasn't effective. Now, how can this be? Well, 71% of the respondents said that they experienced some kind of roadblock that keeps from maximum learning on the job. So some of those were, as you pointed out, it was the time to actually commit. One of the big ones was that the content was too generic. Of course it is. I believe personally, and again, this is from 15 years of in-house working with consulting and delivering to cohorts of folks. And I know that the biggest problems generally stem from, how do we do the right things around here? What does it mean to be a first line manager here? What does it mean to be a salesperson here? When we use generic content, we strip out anything to do with culture, and that means the expectations of our leadership, of our senior managers, of our teams, of our colleagues, of our stakeholders, customers, clients, systems, technologies, processes. When you strip that stuff out, what is actually left? Well, the thing is that it's not a lot. I see it akin to trying to remove the egg from a cake. Well, by the time it's baked, the egg is the cake, and the cake is the egg. I think we might have got a bit philosophical there, but you can see that the blockers to people feeling as if they get maximum learning from the job are real, and these are things that we need to address in learning and development. I know that for as long as I've been in the profession, we've been trying to empower self-directed learners, which suggests that learners need to come all the way to us. But I've been arguing for a long time that we need to come a long way back to them to start leading them from where they are, and not assume that it's their lack of time or lack of motivation that is the reason that they're not engaging. It's the lack of context, and them believing that they're not that their time spent engaging in our content is going to equate to the improvements that they wish to see. And this is the last slide before I throw it over to you again. When we asked what's the most effective way of learning in your organization, the highest response was learning from peers, which goes back to what I say, that as well as it, I suppose, it being personalized, it's rich in context, understanding what it means to be successful within that organization and within particular tasks. Of course, coaching and mentoring was number 2. Again, it provides a rich context, which is light years away from more generic solutions. But my question to you is, I'm going to show you in a moment what people believed was the most effective way for them to fit learning into their schedule. So what do you think it was? Do you think the most effective way was scheduling a small amount of time each day? Did you think it was committing to 1 day of training each year? Or did you believe that it was learning as they go? Please let me know what you think that the vast majority of respondents thought.
I'm very interested in this, David, because I was surprised when you showed me the results of this poll. By the way, if you've chosen a particular answer or you don't agree in one answer, then please feel free to add something in the middle of the screen where it says discussion, scheduling learning. Please free to add your comments there. I was very surprised by the results of this, and it didn't match my answer at all. So I'm very, very interested to see what people say here. So we've got numbers still coming in. We're going to keep the poll open. I think we're getting close to everybody voting. All right. I'm going to end the poll. Oh, no, not yet. Okay, so we've got every time you think you're going to end the poll, somebody else comes in and votes. I'm going to end it now. All right. So we've got 29, 2, and 68%. Do you want to go off and show us what your survey said?
Yeah, and our survey said, and of course, you were right. That nearly 2/3 of folks said they learn as they go. And what's that part say? Making the most of opportunities to speak with people and look things up for themselves. Now, I think what's really important here, first of all, that is a larger number, and considering that a lot of us have had Google and YouTube at work, if not on our desktops, then certainly on our smartphones, that we've kind of trained ourselves to learn as we go. But we've got to account for context as well, because there are going to be people who've responded to this who work from the paradigm that they've learned before work, where perhaps they've completed an apprenticeship or a training course was applicable before they started work, because the work itself was more predictable and manual. So we've got to consider all different working contexts, and that's probably why we haven't seen 100% across the board here. But we saw that just over 20% of folks said that they schedule a small amount of time each day for learning, and then we still had people who attended a day of training per year. But overwhelmingly, we had that people learn as they go, which as Don had mentioned there, he was surprised about. But again, the thing that is so crucial here, and look, I'm not going to apologise for being a broken record, because I think it is so crucial to our profession that we ask what's most effective and not make it hypothetical, but what has been most effective to fit learning into your schedule, so we get it down into the gritty reality, because this doesn't reinforce a lot of the way that we spend our money in learning and development. So we are talking about learning in the flow of work there. People have said that they like to learn as they go. Now, of course, learning in the flow of work is our jargon, and that's why we didn't actually use the language. You'll see that if we'd have said learning in the flow of work, we might as well have put another one saying, sorry, I don't understand your jargon. So that's our jargon. We can own that. But we can see that there are a large number of learning professionals who had stated that learning the flow of work was a priority, which again I think is a pretty heartening statistic. And for those who say that it's not, they don't know, or perhaps it's not a priority at all. Again, I hold my hand up and say that there are going to be those professions and organisations where learning before somebody is equipped to do the job is far more important than it is to perhaps guide and support people as they go. I see that there are some questions coming in, which is great, and Don will be facilitating a Q&A. We'll get through this.
I'll throw those to you at the end, David, and I'm sure they'll
lovely.
facilitate even more questions.
Brilliant. Well, I'm gonna ask another question, so another poll question, and ask you: are you prioritising learning the flow of work? And again, this will account for your context as well. So by all means, vote in the polls, but tell me why you're not why this isn't a priority for you, and so to increase my understanding of your context as well. And loved it to tell me why it shouldn't be a priority, but. We've got a good mix coming in.
It's a very interesting mixture. I mean, it was very fast, as often happens with polls, a very fast response on some answers,
Mm.
and then later answers come in, which often alter the overall profile of the results. Okay, I think we've got all. No, I'm going to close it down in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2. All right, we're going to close it. There we go. Interestingly, vast majority yes, but only for some initiatives. Is that what you're expecting, David?
Yeah, I think that I think that's a very balanced view. Again, having done the job for 15 years and led functions, I think I'd be really worried if everybody had said they use it all the time, because I don't advocate using any approach all the time. So I think that that's a very balanced view that 2/3 say, and heartening one, I think, that 2/3 say that they use it for some initiatives. Rather than all, but it was interesting. It's always interesting to see what the matchup is between the people that we support, who say that this is their preferred or the most effective way that they can learn, and ours in terms of how we apply our budgets and our attention, and a lot of the time our credibility within our organisation. So thanks, Don. So a way to consider this this is a challenge that I face all the time, and again, like when introduced most of the training programs that were run in the UK Learning and Development team. So I know the faces that we saw and the faces that we didn't see, and it was the most highly regarded people in our organisations that we never saw in the classroom. So we were always asking, so what is it that they're doing that was making them so successful? And I think it's the reality, and I think we all know this, that the skills are developed on the job, and it's a lot of the time it's despite what goes on in classrooms, which can act as a bit of a springboard. And I suppose this is real classrooms as well as virtual classrooms, but I don't think that any of us believed that the skills themselves were developed in the classroom. So how do we guide and support people where they're actually working? In order to, and I think a good way of doing this is legislate for those who will never see in classrooms or on courses, and how can we still help them to do more of the right stuff? And I think that learning the flow of work almost belies its definition. I know that Bob Mosier agrees with me in that learning the flow of work isn't actually learning; it's guidance and support for what people are expected to do, and the learning happens as a result of the actual live doing. And I know that there's a lot of arguments saying that practice should be a part of learning and development. And again, in some contexts, that will be the case. But having worked in knowledge work since I left school in 1990, I realised that there's very little that you can practice, because so much changes. You are exposed to so many new and different and challenging experiences on a daily basis, but so much of it is rich in culture. And of course, moving from a topic-centric perspective to a more of a people-centric perspective means that we'll gain more engagement, because we're speaking to what people are expected to do within their roles, within their departments, in their teams, in the organisation. We can buy vast suites of learning content that is categorized, that helps us for the purposes of delivery and for storage, but whether it actually helps people, it's actually questionable, unless it is focusing on what people who are in our organisations expected to do. I'll skip over that one now. I think it's pretty much covers what I've done. But data is our friend, and data is our friend into helping us solve business problems. Because I think that this is the critical part. People always say that, and and I experience it as well, that engagement, especially in digital solutions, is notoriously low. but a lot of the time is because we're trying to solve a learning problem rather than a business problem. But if we help to solve a problem that people are keenly experiencing, then we're already where people are. And then to use evidence to understand their perspective, then that's easier as well. But too often, and I think that the conversation veering too much towards a learning, too much about learning and learning content and learning solutions, is a distraction a lot of the time from what it is that people are in our in organizations to actually do. So if we actually understood data, and what I mean by this is what's not working well against how it's expected to work, then we always have our ground zero. So a stakeholder will invite us in to talk about a learning solution that they would like delivered. If we can get the conversation towards outcomes, how it's working now and how it should be working in the future, and then seek data to understand that, then we already understand then from our perspective where things are now and then what the improvement will be. But if we keep the conversation on learning and what we want people to learn and whether we believe we've learned that, it's all so much at a nebulous level. And one that I believe is a distraction. I know that we can get into debate titles and the like, but I think one of the silliest things about our profession that is called learning and development at all, because no one's ever been promoted or deemed successful in their organizations because of what they know or what they've learned. It's only ever about what people do and what they achieve. So if we held ourselves accountable to performance and capability, I think that we would start seeing our role and our measures of success very, very differently. But all this, did you learn it? Have you remembered it 3 months later? I think is a silly distraction. So what we can do to counter this is, instead of talking about or looking for learning needs, it's to start looking for critical points of failure. And this isn't fanciful. This isn't me just pulling this out of the air. When I talk to my guests on the Learning and Development podcast, and a couple of them spring to mind. There's Sebastian Tyndall at Vitality, who runs a backlog, and he'll deal with requests from his business, and he's automated this entire approach. But he evaluates that on the value that it will bring to the organization, and you can only really measure the value of towards the organization if you understand the cost right now. And I think he's leading the way. There's some other folks, Timu Lilia and Fredrik Peterson at Telia, a Swedish company, who do the same. And again, they have conversations about critical points of failure, how things aren't working in their organization. Because if you truly understand that from a KPI perspective, and that is the department's KPIs or the individual KPIs, then you can engage people because that's what they're in the organization to do. And then you've got your ground zero, so you understand where you're working from. And help to achieve that. And Timu and Fredrik, who I had on the podcast very, very recently, said that from the analysis they've done and the data that they gained and the conversations they had off the back of it, they were able to increase the average sales of a sales rep by 160%. It's completely unheard of, and there was virtually no training element to it, because when they unpacked what the actual problem was with the people experience, they saw that there were just a few structural elements that they were able to tweak, and they did this in next to no time. They are now looking after not just sales capability, but all of learning and development at Telia. Timu was awarded Employee of the Year at Telia last year, and they were also awarded Sweden's Learning Team of the Year. Because they were solving real problems rather than jumping on assumptions or building learning content. Again, when you know what the problem is and you validate that with the people who are responsible for the work, it becomes a lot more obvious where we need to apply our attention. Number 4, and again, I'm loving that you've got the questions coming in. I look forward to pausing very shortly and engaging with those. But how to get leadership buy-in? I hear this one all the time. I apply this with my aligning the planets excuses for not modernizing a learning function or pivoting towards performance. And what I mean by aligning the planets is that when talking, I hear, oh yeah, we'll be modernizing, or we'll pivot to performance, or we'll seek data once we've developed our learning culture, once we've got senior level buy-in, once the CEOs on board, or once line managers are doing more of the work. And I think, all these barriers that you place on there that which means you'll never do it because you'll never get permission to do something different. And this was backed up again in the report that 23% of UK respondents say they don't have buy-in from senior leaders on how L&D structures training programs. My question is, why ask? I've got my car's going in for a service at the beginning of next month, but I'm not going to ask for permission for them to use their expertise to serve it in the way that's going to pass its MOT. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them to pass their MOT, and I'm going to trust that they as professionals and skilled in their field are going to be able to get that to pass its MOT. But I think for far too often we seek the permission to do things slightly differently, and I think a lot of the time it's because we don't back ourselves to deliver a return on the investment. And in the absence, and when we don't back ourselves, then all we can really do is deliver on demand. So all I'd say to you is everybody I've spoken to on the Learning and Development podcast who successfully pivoted to a data-driven and a function that could reliably and predictably deliver impact, none of them asked for permission. Each of them started with a small pilot project alongside the request they get for training. Now, there's a big difference here between by just pivoting and then saying, right, we'll only operate from data, we'll only seek to affect performance and all of that stuff. I'm not an advocate of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'll always say, if something works, keep it. If you don't know it works, it probably doesn't work. So that probably needs addressing. But people will always ask for, have you got content on this, or have you got a course for that? You can't. If all you're doing is fending people off and saying, well, we don't do that anymore because we don't know it works, then you're going to be firefighting and become very unpopular. So you almost need that needs to look after itself. But as for having conversations and addressing critical points of failure in an organization, which will get you the engagement, which will lead to actual impact-driven L&D, that needs to run parallel a lot of the time. And this will also mean that working with cohorts of people who are responsible for the work are not delivering to large varied groups of people who may or may not benefit from the training. I'll give you a great example here of something that gained leadership buy-in on a global scale that delivered next to no return. Anybody here, tell me on the chat, involved in any courageous conversations training in the last decade, maybe 15 years?
Can you say what courageous
conversations? Yeah.
What can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah. So at Disney in about 2012. We were moving away from performance reviews and convinced the organization that instead of doing regular performance reviews, courageous conversations that were more regular would be more beneficial. And we rolled this out. It was rolled out globally, and there was a training company who got very rich off the back of that.
David, Madeline, Natalie, Carol, and possibly some other people saying yes, we're doing this. Go on. What was the impact?
Well, I mean, there's a solution looking for a problem right away. That if you don't do the analysis, that if you then what you could do is you can get sign off, and you can convince anybody that this is the answer to whatever the problem is. And I was part of it, and I've seen that you can spend millions of pounds on a solution that you've convinced your leadership should be delivered to next to no demonstrable impact as a result. I remember being in a meeting towards the end of my time at Disney, and a very senior person at Disney said, "Oh, you got to leave me, David. I'm off to have a courageous conversation." Just a bit of a Mickey take. There's no doubt that there are going to be some people who benefit from having those conversations and being part of those conversations. But to the extent it was positioned as the panacea, I think I think it's silly. but 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 if we are going to act on data and address the problems that people face in the context in which they're expected to perform, then I think that we go a long way towards impactful L&D, and our leadership will buy in at the conversation level, not at the point in which we're trying to deliver a different what's the word I'm looking for? A different taste of learning and development. The last part has been leading up to this all the way through. This is proving your impact as a learning and development professional, and this is my my final poll. Again, I can see that there's plenty of busyness on the chat that we'll come to, but I'd love to know how you demonstrate the impact of your digital L&D initiatives, please.
This is interesting, David, because it's a more balanced set of answers. By the way, if you click other and you feel like doing it, please use that big box in the middle, poll for discussion, to talk about how you, I was going to say measure, but demonstrate is a better word, how you demonstrate the impact of your digital L&D initiatives. Okay, the votes are still coming in, but I think they've slowed down now. Carol and two others are typing in the middle, so we can keep the poll open and wait for them to come through. I'm just going to ask, I mean, it looks like most people are saying they use a mixture of things, although Carol says a mixture of A and B, not C, and Norka says the same thing, interestingly. David, do you have any observations about these answers?
Yeah, look, it doesn't surprise me. I think that the vast majority of people will look to learning metrics and qualitative feedback, and that's because a lot of the time we start with the learning solution. That we, again, when we look at gaps in our learning offering and look to plug those gaps, we're not looking at to consider what if there's a critical point of failure in our organization. Therefore, we don't understand the real problem that we're seeking to solve. Therefore, there's no real way of proving that this has impacted employee performance, because we hadn't done the analysis. And again, this is when L&D is on its head, when we bolster our offering, as it were. Then the only thing we can really seek is who showed up, who stayed to the end, who liked it, who'd recommend it to somebody else they know, and whether people themselves think that they were better after they invested that time. I mean, it's all we're really left with. So the fact that half of folks say that that's how they're measured doesn't really surprise me. But I was also doing an event yesterday with Guy Wallace on Pivot's performance, when somebody legitimately asked the question, but are L&D really, is our remit really to affect performance? Guy answered very measured in that and said, depends what you're there for. Because there are plenty of learning and development functions who aren't held accountable for employee performance. It is like somebody at the postal service. You're just there delivering the letters. Your job is done once you've popped that through the letterbox. Whether somebody pays the bill or not, it's not down to the postman. And I think that if we're not holding ourselves accountable to employee impact, and that's not being we're not being held accountable for that, then I suppose we're in the same situation that we've always been, which is there is hundreds of billions of pounds spent globally on learning and development, and it's believed about 10% of that equates to actual value. I mean, if we're operating in challenging times, then we expect our budgets to be cut. But the thing is that if we do hold ourselves to accountable to performance, because we engage in a different type of conversation about outcomes, we seek the data to understand our ground zero, we get the evidence from the people expected to do the job, and we partner with them until we make a demonstrable difference, then the organization improves. Well, first of all, people engage, the organization improves, we're able to demonstrate our value. And like has happened with Sebastian and the others that I've mentioned already, you get greater responsibility within learning and development and greater resources. It continues. But if we're not able to demonstrate our impact, I suppose we live in perpetual anxiety as to whether we're going to be around or not. And I also say about the impending skills crisis that we're facing if we're not already in it. If 80% of the workforce of 2030 are already in the workforce, and reskilling is going to become such an enormous part of that. Buying platforms filled full of generic content that doesn't speak to anybody's jobs isn't really an option. We really do need to hold ourselves accountable to people doing the jobs and achieving the outcomes, which after all is performance and results. So when it comes to, but thanks for getting involved there, everybody. But what it really comes down to is truly understanding the problem. Again, on the conversation I was engaged with yesterday with Guy Wallace, we had Judy Hale on, who's a performance improvement expert. She was talking about root cause analysis, which we didn't get to the question, but we were asked. I didn't learn that on my learning and development qualifications. We did training needs analysis. But again, if you don't understand the root cause of a problem, are you really going to address it? Or otherwise, you're going to buy more learning stuff that people ignore or resist. Because the only real metric that matters is whether somebody applies it or not. And if we stop getting involved well before somebody applies it, then again, like we should be nervous about if we can't prove our impact, we should be nervous about our existence. And the only way that we can the only real KPIs beyond that are the employees' KPIs. So what they're in the organization to do, and whether we're able to help people to do that. Now, I'm gonna wrap up, and so Don, get ready with the questions on here, because my 4 tips on what we need to do is, first of all, invest in ourselves. Don't think you're ever going to be saved by technology, because you're really not. If anybody remembers, and now I'm going to show my age, you'll probably remember this, Don. If anybody remembers interactive video, my question is always, where's that? Because that was saving us 10 or 12 years ago. That was, I suppose, that might have been the AR and VR of the beginning of the last decade, but it didn't come true in the way we did, and we've seen micro learning almost come and go, and all sorts of this other stuff that and to anybody who asks, how do I know what technology to use when there's so much out there? Again, if you don't understand the problems, then everything looks like a solution. So we need to help have better conversations. That's something that we need to involve with ourselves. I don't mean courageous conversations either. I mean ones around performance and outcomes. Performance consulting will particularly help us. Product management would help us as well, so that we understand end to end how to add value to any initiative, to any stakeholder, and to our entire organization. Be comfortable asking for and reading bits of data, not massive parts. This isn't about being a data scientist, but also feeling comfortable to experiment as well. But all I say is that if we understand the problems, it's so much easier to develop solutions and see them make impact than it is right now, when we base so much on assumptions and limited observations. And the last part on there is continue to experiment as well. That one and done has never really worked for us. Not since work became less predictable and manual. And in some, I suppose in some areas it will, but it is going to be far more iterative. So we need to run experiments based on the data and the evidence that we gain, working with the people that we're expecting to perform differently, and then scaling what actually works, rather than top-down implementations of really expensive stuff that may or may not work.
Dave, we've got 7 minutes left and bags of questions.
Yeah, let's go for it. I'll leave up my my promotional slides while we'll go for the questions.
Fabulous. Okay, listen, on the left hand, thank you so much for that, David. Bags of stuff. But by the way, I've got something to talk to you about. Plenty of stuff myself, not least the implication that I should be the guy who remembers stuff that everyone else has forgotten, because I must be really old. Actually, you're right. And I'll talk to you about microlearning and video in a second, but let's go to the questions. Oh gosh, there's so many of them. I'm gonna jump in with an observation that was made earlier by Carolina. You focused a lot on the need for performance being the gauge of success, and that people should be, we should focus on the context of people's jobs. Fair enough. Carolina says, my fear is that on the job, so we're talking about learning the flow of work, there is usually little direct instruction on how to do things the right way, and learning by trial and error from other people might not produce quality results since the skills might be misdeveloped. And in the words of Commander Paul Pine of the Royal Navy that I spoke to, when people go into battle, I don't want them to have found out how to use their guns on Wikipedia. So isn't there scope in all work for some form of formal instruction for things which are mission critical?
Yeah, lovely, Don. So first of all, I'm not advocating replacing anything that already works with learning in the flow of work. So if you've got stuff that already works, then brilliant. But if you don't have that already, that course, that program, that support that's helping people, you've got to remember they're fumbling along, probably making the same mistakes that have been made hundreds, if not thousands of times in your organization. So what I'm saying here is that if there's a critical point of failure in your organization, so there's a cohort of people who are responsible for the way the work is done and the results, then you should have a conversation with them about performance, their KPIs, and experiment, and then understand the data and partner with them. But I'm certainly not advocating replacing critical training with performance support. I'm absolutely not. But I've also got the checklist manifesto behind me, which talks about adding checklists to pilots training or after their training. And that decreased accidents that we had by an enormous amount as well. So, and I actually had a conversation with Matthew Jertson, formerly an airline pilot instructor and also former head of L&D at SpaceX, who said that airline pilots do learn in the flow of work. And it's a crucial part of their development. So I always say that, counter to that, that there's a place for rigorous training, learning the theory. There's a place for simulation that reflects not just the logical and intellectual elements of learning, but also the emotional. But there's also the support to ensure that people deliver on their KPIs and, of course, deliver safely as well as efficiently and effectively.
I put a link to the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande in the resources on the left-hand side. I'm going to just make your thing a little bit smaller so we can get to that. It's a fabulous book, well worth reading. I was looking around to see if I could find it. Very quickly then, moving on, another question. There's a difference between skills and accreditation for some, and this is, James was making the same point that, sometimes you've just got to have somebody accredited in order to have the license to operate. Fair enough, but I think you've covered that. In terms of courageous conversations, a lot of people said yes, they were using it. Natalie said your description was so true. She was cringing. Madeline said, I honestly don't know what it was all about. My question to you on this one is it about courageous conversations themselves being wrong, or is it about them being positioned as some sort of panacea, a cure-all that will solve everything? Aren't they? Because you did say sometimes it's going to be the right thing to do. So is it the positioning or the product itself, David?
Positioning, 100% positioning. The lack of analysis meant that we assumed everyone should benefit of one generic program or initiative. But if we truly, but without the understanding and any particular critical point of failure, then we don't know really what it was helping. And that's why I think we've ended up spending millions on it for what reason? Anybody wants to point me towards some robust data that shows all of that was worth it. I'm all ears, but I saw an entire profession pivot on this best practice, and I think that's done nothing for either our credibility or the overall ability of our people or our organizations.
Frederick says, focus on outcomes, not outputs. Surely it should be inputs, but I'm guessing you're going to say no. It is focus. This is something you said. So focus on outcomes, not outputs. I'm going to say you're probably going to want to stick with that. Can you explain why?
Yeah, sure. So we should be helped. So we're in our organizations to help that organization to achieve what it's there for. There's no other benevolent reason that we're there.
Yeah. And just to be clear, when we say outputs and outcomes, what are the output and outcome from? Because I think that might clarify it.
Oh, right. So yeah. So from our involvement at all. but it is the people who are responsible for doing the work. I always say that you've got two things. You've got performance, and then you've got outcome. So the way the work is done and the result of the work being done in the right way.
Yeah.
And so it is the people now better equipped to do the work, and therefore the results that should be our ultimate aim. After all, as I said, we're no charity or benevolent thing.
So we're not talking about the output of learning, but rather the outcome in the business.
Totally.
Right. The one last thing is microlearning. You said what comes and goes. Microlearning actually is being used in many places very effectively, but I think I'm going to come back to, I'm going to set this up for you. Surely the answer is not that there's something wrong with microlearning, which in places can be very effective, but rather that, again, it's being positioned as a panacea. And it's the problem is that we invest in something without doing the initial root cause analysis. Is that fair enough?
Yep, Don, what I'll go back to is anything that's working and is demonstrably working within the organization, I've not got a problem with. But the marketing of this was shorter courses, thinking that people don't have, again, it goes back to the engagement problem. People aren't engaging, so make it more engaging. So they weren't staying for the whole thing, so make it shorter. But I think it's very rare that a generic piece of content that's short, long, square or circle will actually be helpful in the context of someone's job. Something that helps to address a known point of need with added context of the organization, department, team, and role is likely to have much greater predictable impact than anything generic.
Absolutely, and we've seen that. I mean, Axonify, I have no interest in Axonify as a company, but they've got a very good job with microlearning. And Foot Locker, for example, they've specifically targeted particular things about how employees work with microlearning, and it works. Andrea says, in our company, we call what David is discussing sheep dipping. Yes. In fact, I think that was the term I was using in the mid-90s. It's a pity we're still dipping those sheep. Katie says, and this is the last question, David, when you work with a diverse group of people, because we're over time, sorry about that, but when you work with a diverse group of people with diverse needs, how do you juggle getting into depth to fully understand the real issues? So you've got a lot of different people with different needs. How do you find out what's really going on, David?
Right. So I'd say that you want to be able. So this is a conversation with the stakeholder accountable for the outputs. When you've got a group of people in a learning event, it's a learning event, and you do the best you can. You're having a conversation about people with diverse needs because they have diverse roles, they're diverse levels. That's a training issue. But as for one of diagnostic via a performance conversation, when you're talking about performance outcomes are not learning needs, then you are talking about critical points of failure. And there are just a series of things that are looking at something that's broken. So your conversation is around something that should work one way because it would deliver these outputs and these results with a defined group of people. But I think that's very different, unless I've completely misunderstood you here, Katie. But if you've got a diverse room of people or virtual room of people who have very different needs, then I suppose the best you could do is facilitate the conversation to understand it all as best you can. Again, based around performance.
A conversation around the performance and accepting that actually there may not be one single answer. May be a series of problems, and in fact, even if it's the same problem, maybe different people have different needs in approaching that particular problem.
But find the data. That's all I'd say as well. Yeah. Everyone's got a view. And a lot of the time, it's their selfish view about how things impact them, where really you should be looking for objective views on the biggest problems in your organization.
That's great, David. Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone in the audience for your fabulous participation and contribution here. Really, we're getting a lot from that, as always. Really great to be hanging out with smart people. Big box of stuff on the left-hand side of your screen to click on and follow through there. I want to say once again, thank you very much for everyone for attending. David James of 360 Learning, thank you so much for being here and for sharing really insightful inputs into how we could tackle some of those issues that we all agreed right at the front were very commonly shared issues in L&D. David, thank you so much.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, everyone.
Everyone, I'm going to stop recording now, and I'm going to put everyone, say goodbye and put you into the lobby.